A dedicated forest ranger discovers an abandoned police canine trapped in a flooding cage during the worst storm in decades. What she risks to save this loyal service dog will break your heart, but the journey that follows will restore your faith in humanity. Watch until the end to witness how one woman's courage in a desperate moment forged an unbreakable bond that changed both their lives forever. Don't forget to like, share, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps. These remarkable stories of compassion reach those who need them most. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Lightning split the night sky, illuminating the dense pine. Forest in brief, electric flashes as rain hammered down in relentless sheets. Park Ranger Morgan Hayes gripped the steering wheel of her patrol vehicle, her knuckles white with tension. The windshield wipers battled futilely against the deluge, barely maintaining visibility beyond a few feet of glistening asphalt. "Come, on just a few more miles," she muttered to herself, leaning forward as if those extra inches might somehow improve her vision through the wall of water. The radio crackled with static, the park service frequencies disrupted by the electrical storm that had swept suddenly over Blackridge National Forest with unexpected ferocity. The weather service had predicted a moderate summer storm, but what had developed in the last hour was anything but moderate. Flash flood warnings had been issued for the entire county, and Morgan was on her way back to headquarters after evacuating the last of the stubborn campers from the eastern campsites. A fallen branch appeared suddenly in her headlights, and Morgan swerved to avoid it, the truck hydroplaning briefly before she regained control. Her heart pounded against her ribcage, adrenaline surging through her system. 10 years as a forest ranger had taught her to respect the wilderness, and tonight, the wilderness was reminding everyone of its raw power. The road curved sharply around Whitecrest Ridge, a particularly treacherous stretch even in good weather. Morgan slowed the vehicle to a crawl, unwilling to risk the steep drop-off that waited beyond the guardrail. Through the passenger window, she could see the valley below, transformed by the storm into a landscape of churning streams and swaying trees. That's when she saw it, a faint reflection that didn't belong, a metallic glint just off the old service road that branched from the main route. Morgan might have missed it entirely, if not for another perfectly timed lightning flash that illuminated the scene for a crucial half-second. "What the hell?" she whispered, easing her truck onto the shoulder and peering through the rain-streaked glass. Most people would have continued driving, eager to escape the worsening storm. But 10 years in search and rescue had honed Morgan's instincts, and something about that reflection triggered her professional alarm bells. Shifting into park and activating her hazard lights, she grabbed her heavy-duty flashlight from the center console. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Hayes," she said into her radio, knowing the transmission might not get through. "I'm stopping to check. A possible abandoned vehicle off Whitecrest Service Road, mile marker 27. Over." Only static answered her, confirming her suspicions about the storm's interference with communications. Morgan hesitated, weighing her options. Protocol dictated waiting for backup before investigating unknown situations, especially in dangerous conditions. But if someone was stranded in this weather, minutes could mean the difference between life and death. Decision made, Morgan pulled. On her rain gear, a heavy forest green slicker with reflective strips and waterproof hat, and stepped out into the storm's fury. The rain hit her like a physical blow, driven horizontally by wind that nearly stole her breath away. Holding her flashlight in one hand and using the other to shield her eyes, Morgan made her way carefully to the edge of the service road. The car, packed dirt, had transformed into a flowing river of mud that threatened to pull her boots from her feet with each step. The beam of her flashlight cut weakly through the darkness, revealing little until she was nearly upon the source of the reflection. What she had assumed might be an abandoned vehicle was actually something much smaller. A metal cage, the kind used for transporting large dogs, partially submerged in rapidly rising water where a drainage culvert had overflowed its banks. Morgan's trained eye took in the scene with growing concern. The cage sat at an angle in the muddy water, its bottom already submerged. It appeared to have been deliberately placed, or more accurately, dumped, in this remote location. But why would someone? Her thought remained unfinished as the flashlight beam revealed movement inside the cage. Something dark shifted in the shadowy interior, and Morgan's heart skipped a beat. "Hello?" she called out, her voice nearly lost in the storm's roar. "Is someone there?" She approached cautiously, years of wilderness training keeping her alert for potential dangers. Wildlife could be unpredictable, especially when cornered or stressed. As she drew closer, her light finally penetrated the cage's interior, and Morgan gasped audibly. Inside lay a dog, a German shepherd with the distinctive markings and build of a police K9 unit. The animal was lying on its side, dark fur matted and soaked. Its ribs were clearly visible even from a distance, and one of its hind legs was awkwardly positioned. As Morgan's light passed over its face, the dog raised its head slightly, amber eyes reflecting the beam with a dull gleam that spoke of exhaustion and resignation. "Oh my God," Morgan breathed, moving closer. The cage was secured with a heavy padlock, and the rising water had already reached halfway up its sides. Another few inches, and the dog would need to swim to keep its head above water, something the exhausted animal clearly lacked the strength to do for long. A deafening crack of thunder directly overhead made Morgan flinch. Rain pounded against her back as she crouched to examine the cage more closely. The dog watched her movements with wary attention, but made no sound beyond a soft, involuntary whimper when a particularly strong gust of wind rocked the cage. Morgan recognized the signs of severe malnutrition and possible abuse immediately. The animal's condition suggested long-term neglect rather than a recent abandonment. But what was most puzzling and disturbing was the equipment still attached to the dog. Around its neck was a faded but recognizable police K9 unit collar, complete with badge number and nameplate that read Atlas. "Atlas," Morgan said softly. "I'm going to get you out of here, okay?" The dog's ears twitched at the sound of his name, and his tail moved in the slightest suggestion of a wag, a response that sent a surge of protective determination through Morgan. This wasn't just any abandoned animal. This was a police service dog, trained to protect the public, now discarded and left to die in the most cruel manner imaginable. Morgan examined the padlock. It was old but sturdy, showing no signs of yielding to force. Without bolt cutters or heavy tools, breaking it would be nearly impossible. She glanced anxiously at the water level, which had risen noticeably in just the few minutes she'd been there. She needed to act quickly. Returning to her truck would waste precious time that Atlas might not have, but she needed tools to free him. Morgan made a split-second decision and waded back through the mud to her vehicle, keeping her flashlight trained on the cage to maintain visual contact. At the truck, she quickly gathered supplies: a crowbar from her emergency kit, a rescue blanket, a first aid kit, and a bottle of water. As she turned to head back, her radio suddenly crackled to life. "Repeat, all Rangers return to station immediately. Flash flood warning elevated to emergency status. Multiple road washouts reported." The voice of her supervisor, Chief Ranger Wilson, broke through the static just long enough to convey the urgency of the situation before dissolving back into white noise. Morgan glanced at the road behind her, already seeing the early signs of water overtopping the asphalt in places. If she didn't leave now, she might not be able to leave at all for hours. She looked back toward the cage where Atlas waited, the water now reaching his belly as he struggled to maintain his position. There was no real choice to make. Supplies in hand, Morgan fought her way back to the cage, each step more difficult as the water level along the service road continued to rise. By the time she reached Atlas, she was wading through knee-deep, fast-moving water that pulled treacherously at her legs. "Hang on, boy," she encouraged, positioning the crowbar at the cage's hinges. The lock might be unbreakable without proper tools, but the hinges were older and potentially more vulnerable. Morgan threw her full weight against the crowbar, using leverage to strain against the rusted metal. The hinge groaned but held firm. She repositioned and tried again, her muscles burning with the effort. Still, the hinge refused to give. The water continued to rise, now covering more than half of Atlas's body. The dog's breathing had become more labored, either from fear or the cold water, or both. His eyes remained fixed on Morgan, neither pleading nor hopeful, simply watching with the patient dignity that made the situation all the more heartbreaking. "I'm not giving up on you," Morgan promised, her voice firm despite the growing desperation she felt. She examined the cage again, looking for any weakness she might exploit. The bottom of the cage, she realized, was separate from the top portion, attached by a series of clips that might be easier to manipulate than the hinges or lock. Submerging her arms in the frigid water, Morgan felt along the cage's lower edge, until she located one of these clips. The cold water numbed her fingers quickly, making the delicate work of manipulating the clips nearly impossible. After struggling with the first clip for what felt like an eternity, Morgan was forced to bring her hands out of the water, tucking them under her armpits to restore some circulation before trying again. "Just a little longer, Atlas," she said, as much to bolster her own resolve as to comfort the dog. A sudden rush of water, stronger than before, nearly knocked Morgan off her feet. The storm was intensifying, and the drainage culvert was now completely overwhelmed. Water surged around the cage, tilting it precariously. Atlas let out a distressed yelp as he was forced to scramble to keep his head above water. The situation had become dire. If Morgan couldn't free Atlas in the next few minutes, he would drown. Before her eyes, desperation drove her to a more drastic approach. Plunging her arms back into the water, she grabbed the cage and began to drag it toward higher ground. The metal structure was incredibly heavy, especially with Atlas inside, and the rushing water fought against her efforts. Each inch was a battle, the mud beneath her feet offering treacherous footing. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Morgan's muscles screamed in protest, but she continued to pull, focusing all her energy on moving the cage just enough to buy more time. After several exhausting minutes, she managed to drag it about 3 feet upslope, temporarily elevating it above the worst of the rising water. Gasping for breath, Morgan returned her attention to the clips securing the bottom of the cage. The slight elevation had given her better access, and she worked methodically, her fingers clumsy with cold, but driven by urgency. One clip came free, then a second. On the third, her fingers slipped and she scraped her knuckles raw against the metal edge of the cage. Morgan barely noticed the pain. A fourth clip released, then a fifth. She moved around the cage, working on the clips from each side until finally over half of them had been undone, enough, she hoped, to create an opening. "Atlas," she called softly, making eye contact with the dog. "I'm going to try to pull the bottom away. I need you to stay calm, okay?" As if understanding her words, Atlas remained perfectly still as Morgan gripped the partially disconnected bottom of the cage and pulled with all her remaining strength. Metal screeched against metal as the pieces separated, creating a gap just wide enough for a medium-sized dog to squeeze through. "Come on, boy," Morgan encouraged, reaching into the gap to gently touch Atlas's side. "You can do it." Atlas tried to move toward the opening, but his injured leg clearly caused him significant pain. He whimpered softly, but continued to push forward, his instinct for survival overcoming his physical limitations. Inch by painful inch, he dragged himself toward the gap Morgan had created. When his head and front legs were through, Morgan carefully supported his body, helping to guide his injured hind leg through without causing additional trauma. Finally, with one last effort, Atlas was free of the cage that had nearly become his coffin. The dog collapsed immediately onto the muddy ground, his strength completely depleted by the ordeal. Morgan wasted no time in wrapping him in the rescue blanket, trying to preserve what little body heat he had left after his prolonged exposure to the cold water. "You're safe now," she murmured, gently examining his injured leg and other visible wounds. The leg appeared to be an old injury, improperly healed rather than recently damaged. More concerning were his severe emaciation and the various cuts and abrasions that spoke of chronic neglect and possible abuse. Atlas needed immediate veterinary attention, but getting him to her truck would be another challenge entirely. The dog weighed at least 70 pounds despite his malnourished state, and Morgan wasn't sure he could walk on his own. She would have to carry him. Gathering Atlas carefully in her arms, Morgan lifted him from the ground. His body felt lighter than it should have, a testament to how much muscle mass he had lost, but he was still a substantial burden. Morgan staggered slightly before finding her balance, then began the arduous journey back to her vehicle. The return trip was a nightmare of slipping feet, rising water, and muscle fatigue. Twice, Morgan nearly fell, managing at the last moment to regain her footing without dropping her precious cargo. Atlas remained absolutely still in her arms, as if instinctively understanding the precariousness of their situation. By the time they reached the truck, Morgan was operating on pure adrenaline and determination. She managed to open the rear door one-handed and gently placed Atlas on the back seat, which she hastily covered with an emergency blanket from her gear. "Hang in there, buddy," she said, arranging the rescue blanket more securely around his trembling form. "We're going to get you help." As Morgan climbed into the driver's seat, reality reasserted itself. The road ahead was likely becoming impassable, and the nearest veterinary clinic was in Millfield, over 30 miles away. Her ranger station was closer, only about 7 miles, but would have limited medical supplies for an animal in Atlas's condition. Making a split-second decision, Morgan activated the truck's emergency lights and began carefully navigating back onto the flooded road. The ranger station had to be her first stop. From there, she could coordinate with emergency services and hopefully arrange urgent veterinary care. The drive was tense, with Morgan forced to detour twice around sections of road that had been completely washed out by the storm. In the back seat, Atlas drifted in and out of consciousness, his breathing shallow but steady. Every few minutes, Morgan would speak to him, her voice a lifeline connecting him to safety and warmth. "Stay with me, Atlas. We're almost there. You didn't survive this long to give up now." The ranger station appeared through the rain, like a beacon, its emergency generators providing power despite the widespread outages throughout the region. Morgan pulled up directly to the main entrance, honking her horn repeatedly to alert those inside to the emergency. The door burst open, and Chief Ranger Wilson emerged, his weathered face registering first relief at seeing Morgan, then confusion at her vehicle's position, and finally alarm as she threw open the rear door to reveal Atlas. "I need help, Chief," Morgan called over the storm's continuing fury. "He's a police K9. Someone left him to drown in a cage off Whitecrest." Wilson's expression darkened, but he moved immediately to assist, calling over his shoulder for the station's first aid kit and whatever veterinary supplies they had on hand. Together, they carefully lifted Atlas from the vehicle and carried him inside to the relative warmth and safety of the station. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. The station's small medical room, typically used for treating minor human injuries, was repurposed for Atlas's immediate care. Morgan cleaned his wounds, while Wilson coordinated with emergency services over the satellite phone, the only reliable communication remaining in the storm. The news wasn't good. All roads to Millfield were currently impassable due to flooding, and the earliest a veterinarian could potentially reach them would be morning, assuming the storm abated overnight as forecasted. "He needs fluids, antibiotics, proper medical care," Morgan said, her voice tense with worry as she monitored Atlas's weak pulse. "I don't know if he can wait until morning." Wilson placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Lisa used to be a vet tech before she joined the service. She's on night patrol, but I've raised her on the radio. She's heading back now and should be here within the hour." Morgan nodded gratefully, turning her attention back to Atlas. She had managed to get him to drink a small amount of water mixed with electrolytes, but he remained dangerously weak. His body temperature was still below normal, despite the blankets and heating pads they had arranged around him. "Who would do this?" she asked quietly, gently stroking Atlas's head. "He's a police dog. He served, protected people. How could anyone just throw him away like garbage?" Wilson's expression was grim. "I've contacted the state police with his badge number. They're checking their records, but communications are spotty everywhere because of the storm," Morgan continued, her gentle ministrations talking softly to Atlas as she worked. Whether it was her voice, her touch, or simply being in a warm, dry environment for the first time in what must have been a long while, the dog seemed to relax slightly. His breathing became more regular, and occasionally his tail would move, in a feeble attempt at wagging when she spoke directly to him. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" Morgan said, carefully cleaning a particularly nasty wound on his shoulder. "Don't worry, we're going to find out what happened to you. And we're going to make sure you never get treated like that again." As she spoke these words, Morgan felt something shift inside her, a sense of connection and responsibility that transcended her professional duty as a ranger. In the span of a few hours, this abandoned, abused service dog had somehow become personal to her in a way she couldn't fully explain. What Morgan didn't yet realize was that this rainy night encounter was just the beginning of a journey that would change both their lives in ways neither could imagine. A journey of healing, justice, and the remarkable bond that can form between two souls when one reaches out to save the other from the brink of destruction. The storm continued to rage outside, but within the ranger station, a different kind of storm was brewing, one of determination, compassion, and the fierce resolve to right a terrible wrong, no matter what obstacles might lie ahead. Ranger Lisa Chen arrived at the station like a whirlwind of focused energy, her compact frame belying the strength and purpose in her movements. She shrugged off her drenched rain gear in the entryway and immediately asked for the patient's location, not wasting a single second on pleasantries or questions about how Morgan had found the dog. The urgency of the situation was apparent to everyone. "In here," Morgan called from the medical room, where she hadn't left Atlas's side since bringing him in. Lisa entered with a large duffel bag, which she promptly opened to reveal an impressive array of veterinary supplies, far more comprehensive than the basic first aid kit the station kept on hand. "I keep my own emergency kit," she explained briefly, noting Morgan's surprised expression. "Old habits from my vet tech days. Never know when it might be needed." She moved to Atlas's side and began a systematic assessment, her hands gentle but efficient as they moved over his body. The German Shepherd watched her with wary eyes, but made no attempt to resist her examination. "How long has he been like this?" Lisa asked, checking his gums and eyes. "Unknown," Morgan replied. "I found him about 2 hours ago in a cage off Whitecrest Ridge. He was already in this condition. The cage was partially submerged in rising water. Lisa's expression darkened, but her hands remained steady as she continued her examination. He's severely dehydrated and malnourished. Temperature's still too low. This leg, she indicated his misshapen hind leg, is an old break that healed improperly, probably at least 6 months old, and these wounds on his flanks and shoulders. She trailed off, her professional demeanor momentarily cracking to reveal genuine distress. "What is it?" Morgan prompted. "These are consistent with wounds seen in dogfighting," Lisa said quietly, "either from being used as a fighting dog or more likely given his canine training as a bait dog." Morgan felt physically ill at the revelation. The thought of this loyal service animal being used to train fighting dogs was almost too much to bear. How could anyone do that to him? "People are capable of terrible cruelty," Lisa replied simply, already moving to action. "But right now, let's focus on helping him. He needs fluids immediately." With practiced efficiency, Lisa established an IV line in Atlas's foreleg, carefully calculating the appropriate fluid rate for his estimated weight and condition. "This will help with the dehydration," she explained, "but he needs antibiotics, too. Some of these wounds are infected." From her kit, she produced several vials of medication. "I don't have a full pharmacy, but these should help combat the most common infections until we can get him to a proper veterinary hospital." Morgan watched as Lisa worked, marveling at the calm competence she displayed. Chief Wilson had retreated to the communications room to continue coordinating with emergency services and law enforcement, leaving the two women to focus on Atlas's care. "Will he make it?" Morgan asked softly, voicing the question that had been haunting her since she'd first spotted the cage in the floodwaters. Lisa glanced up from where she was carefully cleaning one of Atlas's deeper wounds. "He's severely compromised," she admitted. "But he's also displaying remarkable resilience. The fact that he's maintained consciousness despite his condition, that he's responsive to you, these are positive signs." She paused, meeting Morgan's eyes directly. "The next 12 hours will be critical. If we can get his temperature stabilized, keep him hydrated, and get these infections under control, his chances improve significantly." Morgan nodded, absorbing this realistic but not hopeless assessment. "Then we'll focus on the next 12 hours. Something in Morgan's tone made Lisa look at her more closely. "You've gotten attached to him already, haven't you?" Instead of the defensive response Lisa might have expected, Morgan simply nodded. "There's something about him. Maybe it's knowing he served as a police dog, that he protected people and then was just discarded. Or maybe it's the way he looked at me when I found him, not hopeful, not expecting to be saved, but still watching, still present. He deserved better than what happened to him." Lisa's expression softened. "He was lucky you were, the one who found him." "I'd like to think it wasn't just luck," Morgan replied, gently stroking Atlas's head as his eyes drifted closed, the combination of exhaustion and medication finally allowing him to rest. "I'd like to think there was a reason I spotted that cage when most people would have driven past." The two women worked together through the night, monitoring Atlas's vital signs, changing his IV fluids when necessary, administering antibiotics and pain medication according to Lisa's careful schedule. Outside, the storm gradually began to abate, the ferocious winds diminishing to occasional gusts, the torrential downpour easing to a steady rain. Around 3 a.m., Chief Wilson brought them coffee and an update. "Roads to Millfield are still washed out," he reported grimly. "Emergency services estimate it could be mid-morning before the main highway is passable." Morgan glanced at Atlas, who had been sleeping fitfully, occasionally whimpering in his dreams. His temperature's up a bit, she told Wilson. Lisa says that's a good sign. Wilson nodded, his weathered face showing signs of the long night. I managed to reach the state police headquarters in Lakewood. They're checking their records on Atlas's badge number and should have information for us by morning. Thank you, Chief, Morgan said sincerely, for everything. After Wilson left, Lisa looked up from checking Atlas's latest set of vitals. You should try to get some rest, she suggested. I can watch him for a few hours. Morgan shook her head. I wouldn't be able to sleep anyway, but you could take a break if you need to. Lisa smiled slightly. Stubborn, aren't you? Reminds me of someone else I know. She gestured toward Atlas. Professional working dogs are some of the most determined animals you'll ever meet. They don't know how to give up. It's not in their programming. Is that why he's still fighting? Morgan asked. Even after everything he's been through? Partly, Lisa conceded. But there's more to it than just training. Dogs like Atlas have an innate dignity and purpose. They form profound bonds with their handlers. It becomes their identity, their reason for being. When that bond is broken... She trailed off, her expression troubled. What happens then? Morgan prompted. Lisa sighed. It depends on the dog, the circumstances. Some never recover fully. They shut down emotionally, become shadows of themselves. Others adapt, especially if they find a new purpose, a new person to connect with. Morgan looked thoughtfully at Atlas's sleeping form. So even if he recovers physically, there's a chance he might never be the same emotionally. It's possible, Lisa acknowledged. But it's also possible that with the right person, the right environment, he could find his way back. The conversation lapsed into comfortable silence as both women continued their vigil. Atlas's condition remained stable through the early morning hours, neither dramatically improving nor worsening, which Lisa assured Morgan was actually a positive sign given the severity of his condition. As dawn approached, a subtle change came over the German shepherd. His breathing deepened and his restless movements calmed. When Morgan checked his temperature again, she found it had risen to nearly normal. "Lisa," she called softly, not wanting to wake Atlas. "I think he's doing better." Lisa came over and conducted a quick assessment, a smile spreading across her tired face. His body temperature is almost normal. Pulse is stronger, and some of these wounds are already looking cleaner. He's responding well to the antibiotics. The relief Morgan felt was profound, washing over her in a wave that left her momentarily lightheaded. She hadn't realized just how deeply invested she had become in Atlas's survival until that moment. "Does that mean he's going to be okay?" she asked, hope evident in her voice. "He's not out of danger yet," Lisa cautioned, "but he's definitely moving in the right direction. He's a fighter, this one." Around 7 a.m., as the first true daylight began filtering through the station windows, Atlas opened his eyes. For a moment, he seemed disoriented, his gaze darting around the unfamiliar room. Then his eyes found Morgan, and something remarkable happened. His tail thumped weakly against the blanket, a deliberate greeting that brought tears to Morgan's eyes. "Hey there," she said softly, moving closer so he could see her better. "Welcome back." Atlas watched her intently, his amber eyes more alert and focused than they had been at any point since his rescue. When Morgan carefully extended her hand toward him, he stretched his neck slightly to sniff her fingers, then gave them a gentle lick, a gesture of trust that felt like a gift. Lisa, observing this interaction, shook her head in amazement. "I have never seen a dog in his condition forge a connection so quickly, especially not after what he's been through." "Maybe he knows," Morgan suggested, still captivated by the change in Atlas's demeanor. "Maybe he understands that we're trying to help him." "Maybe," Lisa agreed. "Or maybe he just recognizes something in you that he can trust. Dogs have an uncanny ability to read people, to sense their intentions and character. Chief Wilson's arrival interrupted their conversation. He entered the medical room with a tablet in hand, his expression a complex mixture of relief and contained anger. "Got the report from State Police," he announced without preamble. "Atlas was assigned to the Lakewood K9 unit 4 years ago. Awarded multiple commendations for narcotics detection and suspect apprehension. His handler was Officer James Mercer." Morgan noted the past tense. Was. Wilson's jaw tightened. Mercer was discharged from the force 18 months ago. Misconduct allegations. Apparently, there were suspicions of evidence tampering in drug cases, though nothing was ever proven conclusively. After his discharge, Atlas was supposed to be reassigned or officially retired, but the paperwork fell through the cracks during a department reorganization. "So he just disappeared?" Morgan asked, incredulous. "No one followed up on what happened to him?" "The official record shows Mercer claimed Atlas had died of an unspecified illness shortly before his discharge," Wilson continued grimly. "He submitted falsified documentation that was filed without proper verification. The department is conducting an internal investigation now, but the preliminary assessment is administrative negligence." Lisa shook her head in disgust. "Administrative negligence. That's bureaucracy speak, for nobody bothered to check if a decorated service animal was actually dead or alive." Wilson didn't disagree. "The state police are taking this very seriously. They've opened a criminal investigation into Mercer for animal cruelty and falsifying official documents. They're also looking into possible connections to dog-fighting rings in the county." Morgan struggled to process this information, her hand instinctively moving to rest protectively on Atlas's side. The German shepherd had been listening to their conversation with pricked ears, as if understanding that they were discussing his past. "What happens to Atlas now?" she asked, the question that mattered most to her at that moment. "Technically, he's still state property," Wilson replied. "Once he receives proper veterinary care, he'll be assessed. If he's deemed physically and psychologically fit, he could potentially be reassigned to another handler." "And if he's not?" Morgan pressed. Wilson's expression softened slightly. "Then he would be officially retired and become available for adoption, with preference typically given to law enforcement personnel." Morgan absorbed this information silently, her eyes returning to Atlas. The German shepherd held her gaze. Steadily, something passing between them that transcended words. In the span of a single night, their lives had become inextricably linked, not just rescuer and rescued, but two souls, recognizing something essential in each other. "The roads to Millfield should be clear enough to travel within the hour," Wilson continued. "I've arranged for a veterinary ambulance to meet us halfway. They've been briefed on Atlas's condition and are prepared for emergency transport to their facility." "I'm going with him," Morgan stated. Not a question, but a declaration. Wilson nodded, having anticipated this response. "I've already arranged for Diaz to cover your shifts for the next 48 hours. After that, we'll need to reevaluate based on staffing and conditions in the park." "Thank you, Chief," Morgan said gratefully. After Wilson departed, Lisa began preparing Atlas for transport, securing his IV line and ensuring he was stable enough for the journey. "You've become his anchor," she observed, noting how the dog's eyes continually tracked Morgan's movements around the room. "That's going to be important for his recovery." "I just want him to be okay," Morgan replied. "After everything he's been through, he deserves that much." Lisa gave her a knowing look. "It's more than that, though, isn't it? You feel responsible for him now." Morgan didn't deny it. "When I found him in that cage, something changed. It wasn't just about doing my job anymore. It became personal, like I was meant to find him, specifically me, not just any ranger who happened to be passing by." "Some connections defy explanation," Lisa said thoughtfully. In my years working with animals, I've seen it happen. A particular animal and person finding each other at exactly the right moment, when each needs the other most. The observation lingered between them as they completed preparations for Atlas's transport. Within the hour, as Wilson had predicted, they received confirmation that the roads were passable enough for emergency vehicles. The veterinary ambulance would meet them at the junction of Highway 16 and the Park Access Road. Moving Atlas required careful coordination. They transferred him to a makeshift stretcher, a backboard cushioned with blankets, and carried him gently to Morgan's truck, which had been prepared with additional padding in the back seat. Lisa rode with Atlas, monitoring his condition, while Morgan drove with exquisite care, avoiding potholes and washouts on the still treacherous roads. The landscape told the story of the night's storm: downed trees, debris scattered across the pavement, and streams still swollen beyond their banks. Yet the morning sun now pierced through breaking clouds, casting golden light across the rain-drenched forest. The contrast wasn't lost on Morgan. Darkness and danger, giving way to light and hope, a metaphor for Atlas's journey from abandonment toward rescue. At the designated meeting point, the veterinary ambulance was already waiting, its emergency lights flashing steadily. 2 veterinary technicians immediately approached as Morgan pulled up, their movements efficient and practiced as they assessed Atlas and prepared him for transfer to their vehicle. "He's more stable than we expected based on the report," one technician commented, clearly impressed. "You guys did an amazing job with emergency care." "That was all, Lisa," Morgan said, gesturing toward the former vet tech who was briefing the other technician on the medications and treatments they'd administered. "And you," Lisa countered, overhearing the comment. "He wouldn't have survived the night without your quick action and constant attention." As the technicians prepared to load Atlas into the ambulance, Morgan leaned down to say goodbye, at least temporarily. "I'll see you soon," she promised, her voice low and meant only for the German Shepherd's ears. "You keep fighting, okay?" Atlas's response was subtle but unmistakable. His tail moved in that now familiar weak wag, and he turned his head to briefly press his muzzle against her hand. Not quite a nuzzle, but definitely a deliberate point of contact. The senior veterinary technician, observing this interaction, gave Morgan a speculative look. "Are you family?" she asked, using the term commonly employed for an animal's owner or primary caregiver. Before Morgan could explain the complicated situation, Lisa answered for her. "Yes," she said simply, "she's his family now." The technician nodded, making a note on her tablet. "You can follow us to the clinic if you want. Dr. Winters will want to speak with you after the initial assessment." As Atlas was carefully loaded into the ambulance, Morgan found herself at a decision point. Technically, her immediate duty was discharged. She had rescued the abandoned animal, provided emergency care, and ensured his transport to proper medical facilities. Protocol would suggest returning to the ranger station, filing her report, and resuming her regular duties. But as she watched the ambulance doors close, Morgan knew she couldn't simply walk away and wait for updates. Whatever invisible thread now connected her to Atlas couldn't be severed by mere professional boundaries or procedural guidelines. "Go," Lisa said, reading her thoughts. "I'll catch a ride back to the station with the highway patrol. They're already en route to check road conditions." "What about my shift?" Morgan asked, though her mind was already made up. "The chief already gave you 48 hours, Lisa reminded her. "Use them. Atlas needs someone in his corner right now, someone who's fully committed to his welfare. Based on what we now know about how the system failed him before, I'd say that someone is you." The decision crystallized with sudden clarity. Morgan would follow the ambulance to Millfield, stay with Atlas through his treatment, and ensure That this time he wouldn't fall through administrative cracks or be abandoned by those responsible for his care. It wasn't just about the rescue anymore. It was about seeing through the commitment she had made when she first spotted that metal cage in the floodwaters. "Thank you," Morgan said, embracing Lisa briefly, "for everything you did for him, for us." Lisa waved away the gratitude. "Just doing my job, same as you. Though," she added with a knowing smile, "I think your job description might be expanding in ways you didn't expect." As Morgan climbed into her truck and prepared to follow the ambulance, she reflected on Lisa's words. 24 hours ago, her life had been defined by the predictable rhythms of ranger duties, patrolling trails, assisting visitors, monitoring wildlife, responding to occasional emergencies. Now, she found herself embarking on an unexpected journey with an abused police K9 who had somehow claimed a piece of her heart during the darkest hours of a storm. What lay ahead was uncertain. Atlas's physical recovery wasn't guaranteed, and his emotional rehabilitation would likely be an even greater challenge. The bureaucratic complications of his status as state property presented another potential hurdle, and Morgan herself would need to reconcile this sudden new commitment with her established life and career. Yet, as she pulled onto the highway, behind the ambulance, Morgan felt a surprising sense of certainty amidst all these unknowns. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them. Atlas deserved nothing less than someone who would fight for him with the same determination he had shown in surviving his ordeal. The sun continued to rise over the rain-washed landscape, its light catching on thousands of water droplets that clung to leaves and branches, transforming the ordinary forest into something momentarily magical. Morgan took it as a sign, a reminder that even after the darkest storms, beauty and hope could emerge in unexpected ways. The road to Millfield stretched before her, the first segment of a journey whose destination she couldn't yet envision. But for now, it was enough to follow the ambulance carrying Atlas, to keep her promise to be there when he opened his eyes again, and to ensure that the connection forged in crisis would have the chance to grow into something meaningful and lasting. The Millfield Veterinary Hospital stood as a beacon of modern medicine amid the town's otherwise quaint architecture. Its gleaming glass entrance reflected the mid-morning sunlight as the ambulance carrying Atlas pulled into the emergency bay, Morgan's truck close behind. A team was waiting at the entrance, a testament to the urgent calls that had preceded their arrival. Dr. Eleanor Winters, the hospital's chief veterinarian, directed operations with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to crisis situations. "Straight to treatment room 1, she instructed the technicians as they carefully transferred Atlas from the ambulance. "IV flow rate unchanged. Continue oxygen supplementation, and let's get a full panel drawn immediately." Morgan followed at a respectful distance, wanting to stay close to Atlas while avoiding interference with the medical team's work. The German shepherd's eyes found her briefly during the transfer, that now familiar recognition flickering in his gaze before the doors to treatment room 1 swung closed, leaving Morgan in the sterile quiet of the waiting area. An administrative assistant approached her with a clipboard. "Are you the ranger who found him? We need some information for our records." Morgan provided what details she could, explaining the circumstances of finding Atlas and what she had learned about his identity and history. The assistant took notes efficiently, occasionally glancing up with poorly concealed shock at the more disturbing elements of the story. "Dr. Winters will want to speak with you once the initial assessment is complete," she said when the forms were filled. "It might be a while. There's coffee in the reception area if you'd like." Morgan nodded gratefully, though she knew she wouldn't be able to relax enough to sit in the reception area, much less consume caffeine that would only amplify her already heightened nerves. Instead, she paced the corridor outside treatment room 1, occasionally catching glimpses of the medical team at work through the small window in the door. The activity inside was intense. Blood draws, fluid replacements, diagnostic imaging, wound cleaning. Dr. Winters moved with practiced efficiency, issuing commands in a low, steady voice that carried authority without panic. Morgan caught technical phrases that meant little to her, but understood enough to recognize the seriousness of Atlas's condition. After what felt like hours, but was likely less than 40 minutes, Dr. Winters emerged from the treatment room, removing her surgical mask. As she approached Morgan, "Ranger Hayes, I'm Dr. Eleanor Winters," she introduced herself, extending a hand. "Atlas is stabilized, and we're moving him to our intensive care unit. Would you like to come to my office so we can discuss his condition?" Dr. Winters' office reflected her personality, organized, efficient, but with small touches of warmth in the form of carefully chosen artwork and a collection of carved wooden animals on her desk. She gestured Morgan to a chair before seating herself and pulling up Atlas's preliminary chart on her computer. "First, I want to commend you and the ranger who provided initial care," she began. "Your interventions almost certainly saved his life. The fluids, antibiotics, and temperature management were exactly what he needed in those critical hours." Morgan released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "So he's going to be okay." Dr. Winters' expression grew more measured. "His condition remains serious, but he's responding well to treatment. The immediate concerns are infection, dehydration, and malnutrition, all of which we're addressing aggressively." She turned her monitor so Morgan could see the screen, displaying what appeared to be X-ray images. "These are his radiographs. You can see here that his left hind leg was broken in at least 2 places and healed improperly. This is causing him chronic pain and limiting his mobility." Morgan studied the images, the misaligned bone clearly visible even to her untrained eye. "Can it be fixed?" "Yes, though it will require specialized orthopedic surgery," Dr. Winters explained. "We'll need to re-break the bone, align it properly, and secure it with plates and screws. It's a complex procedure with a lengthy recovery period, but it would significantly improve his quality of life." She scrolled to another set of images. "His other injuries are consistent with dogfighting exposure, puncture wounds, lacerations, and some older scars that have healed poorly. We've cleaned and treated the current wounds, but some will require follow-up surgeries for proper repair, particularly this area near his shoulder where significant tissue damage has occurred." Morgan absorbed this information, her heart heavy, with the evidence of Atlas's suffering yet encouraged by the potential for recovery. "What's the prognosis? Long-term, I mean." Dr. Winters leaned back in her chair, considering the question carefully. "Physically, with proper treatment, nutrition, and rehabilitation, I believe he can recover to a good quality of life. The leg will never be perfect, but with surgery and physical therapy, he should regain significant function. His other wounds should heal well given time and proper care." She paused, her expression becoming more guarded. "The psychological recovery is harder to predict. Atlas has clearly endured significant trauma, not just physical abuse, but the profound betrayal of being abandoned by his handler. Police K9s are specially selected for their strong work drive and handler focus. When that bond is severed, especially in traumatic circumstances, the psychological impact can be severe." "What does that mean for him practically?" Morgan asked, dreading the answer but needing to understand the full picture. "It varies greatly from dog to dog," Dr. Winters replied. "Some recover remarkably well with new handlers or in appropriate adoption situations. Others struggle with trust issues, anxiety, or behavioral problems that can be challenging to manage. In Atlas's case, the fact that he's already showing positive responses to you is an encouraging sign." Morgan hadn't expected this observation and felt a surge of something like hope. He does seem to recognize me even after just a short time. Dr. Winters nodded. It's actually quite remarkable given his history. Service dogs like Atlas are trained to form strong attachments to specific handlers, not to bond quickly with strangers. The fact that he's displaying trust behaviors toward you suggests either an exceptional temperament or that he recognizes on some level that you saved his life. She studied Morgan thoughtfully. The state police have been in contact regarding his case. They've requested that we provide comprehensive treatment and rehabilitation, with all costs covered by their K9 support fund. They've also indicated that his official status is being evaluated pending the outcome of the investigation into his former handler. What happens to him after he recovers? Morgan asked, the question that had been weighing on her mind since they'd learned about Atlas's background. That depends on several factors, Dr. Winters explained. His physical recovery, psychological evaluation, and the state police's final determination regarding his service status. If he's deemed physically and psychologically capable of returning to duty, he could be reassigned to a new handler. If not, he would be officially retired and become available for adoption. Morgan absorbed this information, conflicted emotions churning within her. The professional part of her brain recognized that if Atlas could return to service, that might be the best outcome for a dog bred and trained for working life. Yet another part, the part that had carried him through floodwaters and stayed by, his side through the night, recoiled at the thought of him being placed with someone else, potentially someone who might fail him again. How long will his treatment and recovery take? She asked instead of voicing these complicated feelings. Initial stabilization and treatment of infections and malnutrition will take approximately 2 weeks, Dr. Winters replied. The orthopedic surgery would follow once he's strong enough, with post-surgical recovery and rehabilitation extending another 6 to 8 weeks at minimum. So we're looking at a minimum of 2 to 3 months before he would be considered for reassignment or adoption. The timeline was longer than Morgan had anticipated, raising practical questions about her own involvement. She had 48 hours of approved leave, but after that, her responsibilities at the ranger station would reclaim her attention. Yet the thought of withdrawing from Atlas's recovery process seemed impossible now. Dr. Winters seemed to read her thoughts. You don't have to decide anything today about your level of involvement going forward, but I should mention that having a consistent human presence during recovery can significantly improve outcomes for traumatized animals. If you're willing and able to visit regularly, even after returning to your normal duties, it could make a meaningful difference in his rehabilitation. Morgan nodded, grateful for the doctor's understanding. I'd like to be part of his recovery. However I can. At minimum, I want to make sure he doesn't get lost in the system again. A worthy commitment, Dr. Winters agreed, standing to indicate the meeting was concluding. He'll be sedated for the remainder of today while we continue intensive treatment. You're welcome to look in on him, but he probably won't be responsive until tomorrow morning. I'd suggest you find a hotel for the night, Millfield Inn on Main. Street is comfortable and pet-friendly, should that be relevant to your future plans. The subtle hint wasn't lost on Morgan, who managed a small smile. Thank you, Doctor, for everything you're doing for him. Just doing my job, Dr. Winters replied with professional modesty, though her eyes conveyed deeper commitment. Atlas is a special case, not just because of his service background, but because of the extraordinary circumstances of his rescue. It's not every day we treat a patient who was pulled from floodwaters by a ranger willing to risk her own safety. After leaving Dr. Winters' office, Morgan found her way to the intensive care unit where Atlas had been transferred. Through the glass window, she could see him resting on a specialized veterinary bed, surrounded by monitoring equipment that tracked his vital signs. IV lines delivered fluids and medications, while a warming blanket maintained his body temperature. Even in his sedated state, there was a dignity to his presence, something fundamental that his abusers had been unable to break, despite their cruelty. Morgan placed her palm against the glass, a gesture of connection despite the barrier between them. "I'll be back tomorrow," she promised softly. "You just focus on getting stronger." Following Dr. Winter's advice, Morgan checked into the Millfield Inn, a charming 3-story building that had clearly once been a grand private home before being converted to commercial use. The innkeeper, a motherly woman named Martha, clucked sympathetically when Morgan explained she was in town because of a rescued animal at the veterinary hospital. "You look exhausted, dear," Martha observed, handing over the room key. "When was the last time you had a proper meal?" Morgan realized with surprise that she couldn't remember. The past 24 hours had been so consumed with Atlas's rescue and treatment that her own basic needs had receded completely from awareness. "That's what I thought," Martha said, reading her expression. "Room 7 is all yours. It has a lovely view of the garden. Get yourself settled and I'll have a hot meal sent up in 30 minutes. No arguments," she added, as Morgan began to protest. "You can't help anyone if you collapse from neglecting yourself." The wisdom in this statement was undeniable. As Morgan showered away the grime of the previous night's rescue and changed into fresh clothes from her emergency bag, she acknowledged that exhaustion had indeed caught up with her. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the crisis had ebbed, leaving bone-deep fatigue in its wake. True to Martha's word, a tray arrived at her door 30 minutes later, homemade vegetable soup, fresh bread, and a simple green salad. The wholesome meal revived Morgan's depleted energy, and she realized she needed to address several practical matters that had been pushed aside during the emergency. First, she called Chief Wilson to update him on Atlas's condition and confirm her whereabouts. The chief, usually a stickler for procedure, was uncharacteristically flexible. "Stay as long as you need today and tomorrow," he assured her. The E parks quiet after the storm. Most campers evacuated, and day visitors are staying away until conditions improve. Diaz and Chen have things covered here. Next, Morgan contacted the state police investigator assigned to Atlas's case, providing a detailed account of the rescue and subsequent treatment. The investigator, Detective Rivera, was professionally grateful for the information and personally outraged by what had happened to the canine officer. "We're building a case against Mercer," Rivera informed her. "Animal cruelty, falsification of official records, theft of state property. Atlas was technically state property, not Mercer's personal dog. If we can connect him directly to dog fighting operations, the charges will be even more severe." "Have you located him yet?" Morgan asked. "Not yet, but we have leads. His last known address was vacated 6 months ago, but he has family in Lakewood County. We're pursuing all avenues." After completing these calls, Morgan found herself drawn back to the veterinary hospital despite Dr. Winter's assurance that Atlas would remain sedated. Something about being physically present, even if Atlas wasn't aware of her, felt important. A fulfillment of the unspoken promise made when she had first lifted him from that cage. The hospital staff, now familiar with her role in Atlas's rescue, allowed her into the ICU. A technician provided her with a chair, positioned near enough to Atlas's bed that Morgan could observe the gentle rise and fall of his chest, but not so close as to interfere with the monitoring equipment. "His vitals have improved even in the few hours since you left," the technician told her quietly. "Dr. Winters says his response to treatment is remarkably good, considering his condition upon arrival." Morgan sat with Atlas for several hours, sometimes just watching him sleep, other times softly recounting stories from her years as a ranger, tales of wildlife encounters, rescue operations, and the peace she found in the forest's quiet corners. Whether her voice penetrated his sedated consciousness, she couldn't know, but the act of speaking to him felt right, a way of affirming his value and existence when others had treated him as disposable. As evening approached, exhaustion finally overcame Morgan's determination to maintain her vigil. With a promise to return first thing in the morning, she reluctantly left Atlas in the capable hands of the overnight staff and returned to the inn. Sleep claimed her almost immediately, a deep, dreamless unconsciousness that lasted until dawn. Light filtered through the curtains of her room. Morgan awoke feeling physically refreshed, but with a momentary disorientation about her surroundings, until memories of the previous day's events rushed back. After a quick breakfast, she returned to the veterinary hospital, arriving just as Dr. Winters was completing her morning rounds. "Your timing is excellent," the veterinarian greeted her. "We've reduced Atlas's sedation and he should be regaining consciousness shortly. I thought you might want to be present when he wakes." Morgan followed Dr. Winters to the ICU, where Atlas had been moved to a slightly different arrangement, one with fewer monitoring devices, but still with the essential IV lines and warming elements. The improvement in his appearance was subtle, but noticeable. His breathing seemed stronger, and some of the tension had eased from his body. "His blood work shows significant improvement," Dr. Winters explained, reviewing a chart on her tablet. "The antibiotics are working well against the infections, and the nutrient infusions are beginning to address the malnutrition. We've also started him on a specialized pain management protocol for his leg." As they spoke, Atlas began showing signs of waking, slight movements of his legs, changes in his breathing pattern, and finally his eyes beginning to flutter. Dr. Winters stepped back slightly, giving Morgan the position closest to his line of sight when he fully awakened. "Talk to him," she encouraged softly. "Let him orient to your voice." Morgan moved closer, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. "Hey, Atlas," she said gently. "It's Morgan. You're safe now, in a hospital where they're helping you get better." Atlas's eyes opened fully, unfocused at first, then gradually sharpening as awareness returned. When his gaze found Morgan, something remarkable happened. His tail, which had been motionless, began to thump weakly against the bed, and his ears, which had been flattened in subconscious anxiety, perked forward with unmistakable recognition. "He knows you," Dr. Winters observed quietly, professional detachment momentarily giving way to wonder. That level of recognition after such a brief acquaintance, especially given his history. "It's unusual." Morgan barely heard the doctor's words, so focused was she on the connection re-established with Atlas. She carefully extended her hand, allowing him to sniff her fingers before gently stroking the top of his head. Atlas leaned into the touch, a small gesture that spoke volumes about his trust that by all rights should have been shattered by his experiences. "The overnight staff mentioned you sat with him for hours yesterday," Dr. Winters commented. "That kind of presence makes an impression, even through sedation. Animals often sense more than we realize." Atlas continued to watch Morgan with an intensity that seemed to communicate something beyond simple recognition. There was an alertness to his gaze that suggested he was fully present in the moment, evaluating and responding to his circumstances rather than merely reacting. "We'd like to try getting him to take some water and a small amount of soft food," Dr. Winters said. "Would you be willing to assist? He might be more receptive with you offering it." Morgan nodded, following the doctor's instructions as she prepared a small bowl of specialized recovery food, a nutrient-dense paste designed for debilitated animals, and a shallow dish of water. With careful movements, she presented the water first, holding the dish so Atlas could reach it without straining. After a moment's hesitation, Atlas lapped weakly at the water, taking in just a small amount. "Before resting, This simple action represented significant progress, Dr. Winters explained. Voluntary consumption indicated improving neurological function and a step towards self-sustaining recovery. The food presented a greater challenge. Atlas sniffed at the offered paste but turned his head away, either from lack of appetite or distrust of the unfamiliar substance. "It's okay," Morgan assured him. "This will help you get stronger just a little bit." Whether it was her encouraging tone or the established trust between them, Atlas reconsidered, tentatively taking a small amount of the food from the spoon. Morgan held. Dr. Winters nodded approvingly as he swallowed, and then accepted a second small portion. "Excellent progress," she said. "We'll continue with small, frequent feedings today, gradually increasing the amount as he tolerates it." Throughout the day, Morgan remained at Atlas's side, assisting with his care under the guidance of the veterinary staff. Each small victory, a little more water consumed, a slightly stronger position when changing his bedding, more alert responses to voices and movement around him, built upon the last, creating a momentum of recovery that was almost tangible. By late afternoon, Atlas was maintaining consciousness for longer periods and showing interest in his surroundings. The most remarkable development, from the staff's perspective, was his consistent response to Morgan, his eyes tracking her movements when she stepped away and his visible relaxation when she returned to his side. "I've been reviewing his police training records," Dr. Winters told Morgan during a quiet moment when Atlas had drifted into natural sleep rather than sedated unconsciousness. He was considered exceptional even among K9 officers, highest marks in scent detection, suspect apprehension, and handler focus. His trainers noted his unusual combination of work drive and emotional intelligence. "What does that mean exactly?" Morgan asked. "It means he was not just technically proficient, but demonstrated an ability to read and respond to complex human emotions and situations," Dr. Winters explained. "Some working dogs are excellent at tasks, but lack that intuitive understanding of human emotional states. Atlas apparently had both, a rare and valuable combination." She studied the sleeping German Shepherd thoughtfully. "That might explain his rapid connection with you despite his trauma. Dogs with high emotional intelligence can sometimes differentiate more clearly between individuals, recognizing those who intend harm versus those offering help, even in crisis situations." This perspective offered Morgan a new framework for understanding the bond that had formed between them during the rescue. Not just gratitude from a saved animal, but recognition from an emotionally intelligent being who had assessed her intentions and chosen to trust despite previous betrayal. As the second day of Atlas's hospital stay drew to a close, Dr. Winters presented Morgan with both a progress report and a question. "He's stabilizing well ahead of our projections," she said, reviewing his latest metrics. "The critical phase is passing, and we're transitioning to recovery mode, which brings me to a decision point." She looked at Morgan directly. "Atlas will need specialized care for several more weeks, including physical therapy and psychological rehabilitation before the orthopedic surgery. Typically, this would happen here at the hospital, but given his unique circumstances and remarkable response to you, I'm considering an alternative approach." Morgan waited, sensing where this might be leading but not wanting to presume. With proper training and support, Atlas could potentially continue his recovery in a foster care situation, specifically with someone he's already formed a positive association with. Dr. Winters let the implication hang in the air. It would require commitment, regular veterinary follow-ups, and adherence to a strict rehabilitation protocol. But for some patients, especially those with psychological trauma, a non-institutional environment can accelerate recovery. The possibility both excited and intimidated Morgan. Her small ranger's cabin was hardly equipped for rehabilitating an injured police K9, and her work schedule would present logistical challenges. Yet the thought of Atlas recovering in a sterile hospital environment for weeks without the consistent presence of someone he trusted felt profoundly wrong. Would the state police allow that? She asked, practical concerns surfacing first, given his official status and the ongoing investigation. "I've already discussed it preliminarily with Detective Rivera," Dr. Winters replied. "Given the exceptional circumstances, they're open to the arrangement provided certain conditions are met: regular progress reports, security measures to ensure Atlas remains safe during the investigation, and your agreement to make him available for any procedural requirements related to the case against his former handler." Morgan's mind raced with implications, questions, and possibilities. "I'd need to make arrangements at work, prepare my cabin." "You don't need to decide immediately," Dr. Winters assured her. "Atlas needs at least 3 more days of intensive treatment here before he would be stable enough for transfer. That gives you time to consider and make necessary preparations if you choose to become his foster provider." As if sensing he was being discussed, Atlas opened his eyes, his gaze moving between the 2 women before settling on Morgan with an expression that seemed to hold both question and hope. In that moment, despite the practical challenges and uncertainties ahead, Morgan knew her decision was already made. The connection formed in crisis had deepened into something that couldn't be explained by mere circumstance or professional duty, something that compelled her forward into a commitment whose full implications she couldn't yet foresee. "I'll do it," she said simply. "Whatever is needed to help him recover. Just tell me where to start." Morgan's ranger cabin had never seemed so inadequate as it did now, standing in its modest clearing with its weathered wooden exterior and simple layout. She surveyed it with new eyes, mentally cataloguing all the modifications needed to make it suitable for Atlas's recovery. The 3 days Dr. Winters had mentioned passed swiftly in a flurry of preparations. Chief Wilson had been surprisingly supportive, approving a modified work schedule that allowed Morgan to perform essential ranger duties while spending significant time with Atlas during his recovery. "It's good PR for the Park Service," Wilson had explained gruffly when she expressed gratitude for his flexibility. "Ranger rescues heroic police dog. Can't buy that kind of positive publicity." But Morgan had seen beyond his practical justification to the genuine concern beneath. Wilson might present a tough exterior, but he had a well-known soft spot for working animals, having partnered with search and rescue dogs during his earlier career. Now, as Morgan unloaded supplies from her truck, specialized bedding, ramps to eliminate the need for jumping, physical therapy equipment, and the extensive pharmacy of medications Atlas would need, she felt both determination and trepidation. Dr. Winters had provided thorough training on administering medications, changing wound dressings, and performing the gentle physical therapy exercises that would begin rebuilding Atlas's strength. Still, the responsibility was enormous. Lisa Chen arrived just as Morgan was arranging the living room to accommodate Atlas's needs. She carried additional supplies from the ranger station's medical inventory. "Thought these might help," Lisa said, setting down a box containing heat packs, additional bandages, and a therapeutic laser unit normally used for treating injured wildlife. "The laser is great for promoting tissue healing and reducing inflammation. I've programmed it with the appropriate settings for Atlas's specific injuries." Morgan accepted the equipment gratefully. "You've gone above and beyond, Lisa. I can't thank you enough." Lisa shrugged off the gratitude. "Professional interest. It's not every day we get to help rehabilitate a police K9. Her expression grew more serious. "Have you heard any updates on the investigation?" "Detective Rivera called this morning," Morgan replied, arranging Atlas's new orthopedic bed in the corner of the living room with the best visibility to both the front door and the large picture window overlooking the forest. They've tracked Mercer to his cousin's property in Lakewood County. There's evidence of dogfighting activities there, but Mercer himself wasn't present during the raid. They believe he's been tipped off and is on the run. Lisa's expression darkened. He deserves to face consequences for what he did to Atlas. Rivera assured me they'll find him, Morgan said, though she shared Lisa's frustration. The thought of Mercer evading justice while Atlas suffered the consequences of his cruelty was infuriating. The investigation has apparently expanded beyond just Atlas's case. They've connected Mercer to a larger dog-fighting network operating across 3 counties. Further conversation was interrupted by the sound of a vehicle approaching, the specially equipped veterinary transport bringing Atlas from the hospital. Morgan felt a surge of nervous anticipation. Despite Dr. Winter's confidence in both Atlases, readiness for this transition, and Morgan's ability to manage his care, the moment of truth had arrived. The transport van was driven by Dr. Winters herself, who had insisted on personally overseeing Atlas's transfer and performing an assessment of the recovery environment. She greeted Morgan and Lisa warmly before opening the van's rear doors to reveal Atlas, secured in a specialized travel crate but fully alert and watching the proceedings with interest. "He's had an excellent morning," Dr. Winters reported. "Took all his medications without resistance, ate a full breakfast, and even showed some playful behavior with one of the technicians during his morning assessment. His vital signs are stable, and he's managing his pain well on the current medication protocol." Together, they carefully transferred Atlas from the transport crate to a sling that allowed him to be carried without putting weight on his injured leg. Morgan and Lisa supported his weight while Dr. Winters guided them up the cabin's front steps and into the newly arranged living room. When they gently lowered Atlas onto his new orthopedic bed, his reaction was immediate and heartwarming. He sniffed the bed thoroughly, then turned his head to take in his surroundings, his ears perked forward with interest rather than flattened with anxiety. When his gaze returned to Morgan, his tail began to wag with unmistakable recognition and, in what appeared to be approval. "I'd say he likes his new accommodations," Dr. Winters observed with a smile. "Let's do a quick assessment to make sure the journey hasn't caused any setbacks." The veterinarian's examination was thorough but efficient. She checked Atlas's vital signs, examined his healing wounds, tested his responses to various stimuli, and observed his overall demeanor. Throughout the process, Atlas remained cooperative, though he clearly preferred Morgan's presence within his line of sight. "Everything looks excellent," Dr. Winters concluded, making notes on her tablet. "His wounds are healing well, his appetite is improving daily, and his energy levels are increasing appropriately. The real work of rehabilitation can begin now." She walked Morgan through the daily care schedule once more, emphasizing the importance of consistency in medication timing, physical therapy exercises, and monitoring for any signs of complications or setbacks. The regimen was demanding, requiring multiple medication administrations throughout the day and night, along with specific therapy exercises and regular wound care. "It might seem overwhelming at first," Dr. Winters acknowledged, "but you'll develop a rhythm. And remember, I'm always just a phone call away if you have questions or concerns." After Dr. Winters departed, Lisa helped Morgan settle Atlas more comfortably, ensuring he had access to water and that his medications were organized for easy administration. "I'll check in tomorrow after my shift," Lisa promised as she prepared to leave. "Call me if you need anything, day or night, I mean it." Left alone with Atlas for the first time in their new arrangement, Morgan felt a momentary wave of uncertainty. The structured environment of the veterinary hospital had provided a sense of security, expert help always at hand, if needed. Now, in the relative isolation of her forest cabin, the full weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders. Atlas seemed to sense her apprehension. He made a soft noise, not quite a whine, but a deliberate vocalization, and held her gaze steadily until she moved closer to his bed. "Just us now, buddy," Morgan said, carefully settling beside him and gently stroking his head. "We're going to figure this out together." As if in agreement, Atlas leaned slightly into her touch, a gesture so subtle yet profoundly trusting that it dissolved Morgan's momentary doubts. This remarkable dog, who had every reason to mistrust humans after his experiences, was choosing to place his faith in her. The least she could do was match his courage with her own. The first night established what would become their new routine. Morgan administered Atlas's evening medications, performed the prescribed gentle range of motion exercises on his uninjured limbs, and changed the dressing on his most significant wound, a deep laceration on his shoulder that still required careful monitoring for infection. Throughout these procedures, Atlas remained stoic and cooperative, watching Morgan's movements with intelligent attention. When she praised his patience, his ears would perk forward and his tail would offer a slight wag, as if acknowledging the communication. Morgan had set up her sleeping bag beside Atlas's bed, unwilling to retreat to her bedroom and leave him alone on his first night in the unfamiliar environment. As she settled in for the night, Atlas stretched his muzzle toward her, gently touching her hand with his nose, before relaxing into his own bed with a deep sigh that seemed to carry both contentment and exhaustion. Despite the alarm set for midnight medication administration, Morgan found herself waking naturally just minutes before it was to sound, her subconscious apparently attuned already to the responsibility. Atlas, too, seemed to anticipate the routine, lifting his head alertly as she stirred. "Good boy," Morgan murmured, as he accepted the pills tucked into a small piece of soft cheese, a technique Dr. Winters had recommended. "Back to sleep now." The next morning brought the first real test of their new arrangement. Morgan needed to perform her abbreviated ranger duties, which included checking several trails for storm damage and ensuring warning signs were posted at areas still unsafe for visitors. She couldn't be away for more than 4 hours between Atlas's medication doses, which meant efficient work and no delays. Before leaving, she carefully arranged Atlas's space with everything he might need within reach. Fresh water, some soft toys Dr. Winters had suggested for mental stimulation, and a pad of specialized absorbent material in case nature called while she was gone. The veterinarian had assured her that Atlas was capable of managing short periods alone, but leaving him still felt like abandoning a fragile trust. "I'll be back soon," Morgan promised, kneeling beside his bed. 4 hours maximum. Atlas watched, her preparations with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand far more than should be possible. When she finally headed for the door, he made no attempt to follow, a testament to both his physical limitations and his apparent comprehension of the situation. Morgan completed her duties in record time, constantly aware of the clock ticking down her absence. When she returned to the cabin just over 3 hours later, she found Atlas awake and alert, his head raising immediately at the sound of her vehicle. The relief in his posture was unmistakable as she entered, his tail thumping against his bed in a steady rhythm that conveyed genuine welcome. Morgan felt an answering relief. Their first separation had been successful, a small but significant victory in what would be a marathon recovery process. Days began to flow into a structured rhythm. Mornings started with medications, gentle physical therapy, and fresh bandages when needed. Then came Morgan's abbreviated ranger duties, kept as efficient as possible to minimize time away from Atlas. Afternoons were dedicated to more intensive rehabilitation exercises as Atlas gained strength. carefully controlled movements designed to rebuild muscle without straining his healing injuries. Dr. Winters visited twice weekly to assess progress and adjust treatment protocols. Each visit brought encouraging news: wounds healing cleanly, weight gradually increasing as proper. Nutrition took effect, alertness and engagement steadily improving. "Is responding remarkably well," the veterinarian noted during her second week of visits. "Police canines are bred and selected for resilience, both physical and mental, but even accounting for that, Atlas's recovery rate is exceptional. I believe your care environment is a significant factor in his progress." This environment expanded cautiously as Atlas's strength increased. Initially confined to his bed and the immediate surrounding area, his territory gradually extended to include the entire living room, then the connected kitchen, and finally short supervised excursions onto the cabin's front porch where he could feel the sun on his fur and scent the forest air. These porch sessions quickly became Atlas's favorite part of the day. He would sit quietly beside Morgan, his nose working constantly to catalog the rich tapestry of woodland smells, his ears swiveling to track bird calls, squirrel movements, and other forest sounds. Sometimes he would close his eyes and simply tilt his face toward the sun, a picture of contentment that never failed to move Morgan deeply. It was during one such porch session, nearly 3 weeks into their arrangement, that Atlas demonstrated the first clear evidence of his police training. Still embedded beneath the trauma, a Park Service vehicle approached the cabin, Lisa making her regular visit. But instead of the casual interest Atlas usually showed toward visitors, he immediately shifted to an alert posture, ears forward, body tensed, attention absolutely focused. "What is it, boy?" Morgan asked, noticing the change. Atlas remained fixated on the approaching vehicle, a low whine emerging from his throat. Not fearful, but communicative, as if trying to convey important information. Only when Lisa emerged from the vehicle did he relax, recognizing her as a known entity. Later, when Morgan described the behavior to Dr. Winters by phone, the veterinarian was intrigued. "That sounds like his alerting behavior resurfacing," she explained. "Police canines are trained to indicate when they detect something requiring attention, a suspect, contraband, evidence. The fact that these trained responses are re-emerging spontaneously is a very positive sign for his cognitive recovery." This incident marked a turning point in Atlas's rehabilitation. As his physical strength continued to improve, more aspects of his trained behaviors began to resurface, not triggered by commands or expectations, but emerging naturally as his confidence and security increased. He began to clear rooms when entering them for the first time each day, systematically checking corners and spaces in a pattern consistent with police canine protocols. When Morgan dropped an item accidentally, he would watch its fall with intense focus, a behavior Dr. Winters identified as related to evidence tracking training. Most tellingly, he began to position himself between Morgan and the door when unfamiliar vehicles approached the cabin, a protective posture that spoke volumes about both his training and his developing bond with her. "He's not just recovering," Lisa observed during one of her visits, watching Atlas methodically survey the tree line from his porch position. "He's remembering who he is." The observation carried profound implications that Morgan had been reluctant to fully confront. As Atlas reclaimed his identity as a working police dog, questions about his future became increasingly pressing. Would his physical recovery be complete enough for him to return to service? If so, would he be reassigned to a new handler, taken away from the environment and relationship that had supported his healing? These questions hung unspoken in the air during Dr. Winters' visits, though Morgan sensed the veterinarian was monitoring Atlas with similar considerations in mind. The approaching decision point, the specialized orthopedic surgery that would attempt to correct his improperly healed leg, would force these questions into the open. 4 weeks into Atlas's stay at the cabin, Dr. Winters arrived with Detective Rivera, the state police investigator assigned to Atlas's case. The detective's presence signaled the conversation Morgan had been both anticipating and dreading. Atlas's recovery has progressed to the point where we need to make decisions about the orthopedic surgery, Dr. Winters began after the initial pleasantries and examination were complete. The procedure has the potential to significantly improve his mobility, but it carries risks and will require an extensive rehabilitation period afterward. Detective Rivera, a composed woman with keen eyes that missed nothing, addressed the underlying implications directly. The department needs to determine whether Atlas can potentially return to service or should be officially retired. That decision will influence how we proceed with both his medical care and his permanent placement. The word placement sent a chill through Morgan, though she kept her expression neutral. Atlas, lying on his bed nearby, watched the conversation with pricked ears, seemingly attuned to the significance of the discussion. "What factors will influence that determination?" Morgan asked, striving for a professional tone despite the personal investment she felt. "The orthopedic surgeon's assessment of how much function can be restored to his leg is primary," Detective Rivera explained. "Police canines require full mobility for many aspects of their duties. There's also the psychological evaluation, whether the trauma he's experienced has impacted his reliability and working capabilities." Dr. Winters interjected gently, "The psychological component is particularly complex. Atlas is showing many positive signs of recovery, including the spontaneous re-emergence of his trained behaviors. However, the betrayal by his former handler may have created trust issues that could complicate a working relationship with a new handler." Morgan absorbed this information, her thoughts racing. When would these assessments take place? "The orthopedic consultation is scheduled for next week," Dr. Winters replied. "Depending on those findings, surgery would follow within 2 weeks. The psychological evaluation would occur during the post-surgical rehabilitation period, which typically takes 6 to 8 weeks. Detective Rivera added, "The department recognizes and appreciates the exceptional care you've provided, Ranger Hayes. We're prepared to authorize continued foster placement through the entire rehabilitation process if you're willing to maintain your current arrangement." The offer should have been reassuring, an additional 2 to 3 months with Atlas guaranteed, but Morgan couldn't help focusing on what remained unsaid. What happened after those months concluded? As if reading her thoughts, Detective Rivera continued with careful neutrality, "I should inform you that there has been significant interest from several K9 handlers within the department regarding Atlas's potential reassignment. His record before the incident was exemplary, and many officers would consider it an honor to partner with him if he's able to return to service." The information struck Morgan like a physical blow. Of course there would be interest in a dog with Atlas's training and capabilities. If his leg could be sufficiently repaired and his psychological evaluation showed him fit for duty, he would indeed be a valuable asset to the police force. It was what he had been bred and trained for, a purpose that might fulfill him in ways that living with a forest ranger never could. Yet the thought of surrendering him to another handler, watching him drive away to a new life without her, created an ache so profound it momentarily took her breath away. Atlas, perhaps sensing her distress, rose from his bed and limped to her, sighed, pressing against her leg in a gesture that had become his way of offering comfort and connection. The simple action nearly undid Morgan's composure. Dr. Winters observed this interaction with thoughtful eyes. "There is another consideration," she said carefully. "The bond that has formed between Atlas and Ranger Hayes is unusual in its strength and rapidity. In cases of severe trauma, such bonds can become integral to the animal's sense of security and continued recovery. Disrupting this connection prematurely could potentially trigger regression. Detective Rivera nodded, acknowledging this perspective. I understand. These factors will all be weighed in the final determination. For now, we proceed with the orthopedic consultation and go from there. After the visitors departed, Morgan found herself sitting on the porch steps, processing the conversation's implications. Atlas settled beside her, his body warm against hers, despite the early autumn chill in the air. "What do you want?" she asked him softly, knowing he couldn't answer, yet somehow needing to voice the question. To be a police dog again, with a new handler, or something different? Atlas turned his head to meet her gaze. The intelligence in his amber eyes so pronounced it almost seemed he was considering the question. Then he simply leaned more heavily against her side, a gesture that could be interpreted in multiple ways but felt, in that moment, like a choice. Later that evening, as Atlas slept deeply in his bed, the day's excitement and additional examination having taxed his still-recovering body, Morgan's phone rang. Dr. Winter's name flashed on the screen. "I hope I'm not calling too late," the veterinarian began. "I wanted to follow up on today's discussion when Detective Rivera wasn't present." "Is something wrong?" Morgan asked, immediately concerned. "Not at all," Dr. Winters assured her. "I just felt there were some aspects of Atlas's situation that deserved a more candid conversation. The reality is that while Atlas has made remarkable progress, his leg injury will likely never permit a full return to active duty, even with the best surgical outcome." Morgan absorbed this assessment, torn between relief that Atlas might not be redeployed with a new handler and concern about what this meant for his future. Detective Rivera mentioned interest from other handlers. "Yes, there is interest," Dr. Winters confirmed. "But between us, I believe the department is preparing for the likelihood of his retirement rather than reassignment. They're exploring the possibility of transitioning him to a community role, perhaps as a demonstration dog for public education programs, where the physical demands would be significantly lower." This new information shifted Morgan's perspective considerably. A community role would mean Atlas remaining within the police department's purview, but without the rigorous physical demands of active duty. It was a compromise that honored his service background while acknowledging his physical limitations. Yet it still meant separation from the environment and relationship that had supported his recovery, a transition whose impact couldn't be fully predicted. "I'm telling you this," Dr. Winters continued, "because I believe you should have all the information possible as we move forward, and because I think Atlas's best interests need a dedicated advocate throughout this process." The implication was clear. Dr. Winters saw Morgan as that advocate, the person most attuned to Atlas's needs and well-being beyond the institutional considerations that would inevitably influence the department's decisions. "Thank you," Morgan said simply, recognizing both the professional risk Dr. Winters was taking in this candid conversation and the trust being placed in her judgment. "I just want what's best for him." "I know," the veterinarian replied softly. "That's precisely why I called." The conversation left Morgan with much to consider as she prepared for bed. The path ahead remained uncertain, with the orthopedic consultation representing the next critical juncture in Atlas's journey. Whatever decisions emerged from that assessment would shape not just his physical recovery, but the direction of his future, and, by extension, Morgan's as well. As she settled into her now familiar sleeping position near Atlas's bed, he lifted his head drowsily, acknowledging her presence with the quiet attention that had become their nighttime ritual. "Big days ahead, buddy," Morgan told him softly. But we'll face them together, one step at a time. Atlas sighed deeply and closed his eyes, the picture of trust and contentment despite the uncertainties that surrounded them. In that moment, Morgan made a silent promise, not that she would keep him with her at all costs, but that she would ensure whatever future awaited him honored both his needs and his remarkable spirit. It was a promise that would soon be tested, in ways neither of them could anticipate, as the investigation into his former handler's actions approached its climax, and forces were gathering that would bring Atlas's past crashing back into his hard-won present peace. The morning of Atlas's orthopedic consultation arrived with an autumn crispness that tinged the forest surrounding Morgan's cabin with the first hints of gold and russet. As Morgan loaded Atlas carefully into her truck, a process that had become more manageable as his strength improved, she found herself fighting a persistent anxiety about what the day might bring. The specialized veterinary orthopedic center was located in Ashridge, a city nearly 2 hours from Millfield. Dr. Winters had arranged for the consultation with Dr. Nathan Reeves, one of the few surgeons in the state with extensive experience treating police and military working dogs. His assessment would be critical in determining not just the medical approach to Atlas's injured leg, but the broader question of his potential for returning to service. During the journey, Atlas remained calm in his specially arranged travel bed in the back seat, occasionally lifting his head to watch the landscape passing outside the windows, but mostly resting comfortably. His stoicism never failed to impress. Morgan, this dog who had endured such profound suffering, maintained a dignity and presence of mind that seemed almost superhuman. "Almost there, buddy," Morgan assured him as they entered Ashridge city limits. "Dr. Reeves is supposed to be the best, so we're in good hands." The orthopedic center occupied a modern glass and steel building in the city's medical district. Inside, the facility was clearly designed with working dogs in mind. The waiting area featured reinforced seating areas for dogs still wearing their service vests and tactical gear, extra space between seating sections for privacy, and soundproofing to minimize stress for animals already dealing with pain and injury. They were greeted by a technician who seemed unsurprised to see a police K9 accompanied by someone in a ranger uniform rather than a police handler. "Dr. Reeves is expecting you," she said warmly, helping Morgan transfer Atlas from the portable sling to a padded gurney. "We've been briefed on Atlas's case, quite remarkable." Dr. Reeves himself proved to be a study in contrasts, a burly man with large hands that seemed incongruously gentle as he examined Atlas's injured leg. His voice was soft despite his imposing presence, and he addressed Atlas directly throughout the examination as if conversing with a colleague rather than handling a patient. "Good morning, officer," he said respectfully as he approached the examination table. "I understand you've had quite the journey. Let's see what we're working with here." The examination was thorough, combining hands-on assessment with advanced imaging. Atlas remained cooperative throughout, even when certain movements clearly caused discomfort. Morgan stayed within his line of sight, offering quiet reassurance that seemed to help him tolerate the more uncomfortable aspects of the evaluation. After nearly 2 hours of assessment, including X-rays, CT scans, and range of motion tests, Dr. Reeves invited Morgan to join him in a consultation room where multiple images of Atlas's leg were displayed on large monitors. "Ranger Hayes, I want to be completely straightforward with you about Atlas's condition," he began, using a laser pointer to highlight specific areas on the images. The initial break was severe, a comminuted fracture of both the tibia and fibula. What makes this particularly challenging is how it healed without proper alignment or stabilization. He traced the irregular bone formation on the screen. The body did what it could, forming a callus to bridge the fragments. But as you can see, the alignment is significantly off, creating this angular deformity that's affecting his weight-bearing capabilities. Morgan studied the images, the severity of the damage evident even to her untrained eye. Can it be surgically corrected? Yes, but with important caveats, Dr. Reeves replied. The procedure would involve re-breaking the bone in a controlled manner, realigning the fragments and stabilizing them with a combination of plates, screws, and potentially bone grafts to promote proper healing. He pulled up another image, a 3D reconstruction showing the leg from multiple angles. The complexity here is the duration since the original injury. The Malunian has been weight-bearing for at least 6 months, causing compensatory changes in the surrounding muscle, ligaments, and even other joints as Atlas adapted to the abnormal biomechanics. What does that mean for his recovery potential? Morgan asked, bracing herself for the answer. Dr. Reeves leaned back in his chair, weighing his words carefully. In my professional opinion, with optimal surgical intervention and rigorous rehabilitation, Atlas could regain approximately 75–80% of normal function in that leg. That's a significant improvement from his current state, which I'd estimate at around 40% functionality. He paused before adding, however, I need to be clear about expectations. Even with the best outcome, he would likely retain some degree of lameness, especially during extended physical activity or in cold weather when joint stiffness becomes more pronounced. He would also require ongoing management, including anti-inflammatory medications during flare-ups and regular physical therapy to maintain function. Morgan absorbed this realistic assessment, her eyes finding Atlas through the consultation room's window. He was resting on his padded gurney, alert but calm, watching the movement of staff through the facility with the measured attention of a dog who had been trained to observe and evaluate his surroundings. From a practical standpoint, Morgan asked, what would these limitations mean for potential return to active police work? Dr. Reeves's expression became more measured. That depends on the specific duties. For drug detection work performed in controlled environments, he could potentially function at the necessary level. For suspect apprehension, pursuit scenarios, or any duty requiring jumping, climbing, or rapid direction changes, activities central to most K9 patrol work, the limitations would be prohibitive. He added, there's also the consideration of pain management. While we can significantly reduce his discomfort, high-intensity activities would likely cause pain flare-ups that would need to be addressed. Pain medications can affect a working dog's scent discrimination capabilities and alertness, creating additional complications for service duties. The assessment, while not unexpected given Dr. Winter's hints, still landed heavily on Morgan's shoulders. She had been preparing herself for this likelihood, yet hearing it confirmed by a specialist brought a complex mixture of emotions, disappointment for Atlas's limitations, but also a selfish relief that his future might not lie with a new police handler. So the surgery would be for quality of life rather than return to full duty, Morgan summarized. Precisely, Dr. Reeves confirmed. The goal would be to reduce pain, improve mobility for normal daily activities, and prevent further deterioration as he ages. From a medical perspective, I absolutely recommend proceeding with the surgery. The improvements to his comfort and capability for normal canine activities would be substantial. As Dr. Reeves outlined the surgical approach, risks, and recovery protocol, Morgan found herself contemplating what this meant for Atlas's future. A dog trained from puppyhood for the structure and purpose of police work would now face a very different life path. Some retired canines struggled with this transition, missing the stimulation and clear objectives of their working life. I have one more question, Morgan said when Dr. Reeves concluded his explanation. How do dogs like Atlas typically adjust to retirement? Psychologically, I mean. The surgeon's expression softened. It varies considerably. The transition is often challenging. These dogs are selected specifically for their high drive and work focus, Without proper outlets for that energy and intelligence, they can develop behavioral issues related to boredom or anxiety. He glanced through the window at Atlas. The most successful transitions I've observed share common elements: a structured environment that maintains aspects of their training routine, mental and physical challenges adapted to their capabilities, and most importantly, a strong bond with their handler or adopter. His gaze returned to Morgan, carrying unspoken assessment. From what Dr. Winters has shared about his recovery under your care, Atlas appears to be forming exactly the kind of bond that facilitates successful transition. That's not something that can be manufactured or prescribed. It happens or it doesn't. The consultation concluded with scheduling for the surgery, set for 1 week later. Dr. Reeves would personally perform the procedure, after which Atlas would remain at the orthopedic center for 3 to 5 days before returning to Morgan's care for the lengthy rehabilitation process. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Reeves offered one final observation. Police K9s are exceptional animals, Ranger Hayes. They're selected for intelligence, drive, and resilience beyond what we see in typical companions. Those same qualities that made Atlas an outstanding officer also enabled him to survive his ordeal and form this new connection with you. Whatever path his future takes, those fundamental qualities remain intact. The drive back to the cabin was quiet, Morgan processing the consultation's implications while Atlas dozed in the back seat, fatigued from the examinations and unfamiliar environment. They were about 30 minutes from home when Morgan's phone rang, Detective Rivera's name appearing on the display. Using her vehicle's hands-free system, Morgan answered the call. "Detective, we've just finished at the orthopedic center." "How did it go?" Rivera asked, her voice carrying a note of genuine concern. "Dr. Reeves recommends surgery to improve function, but confirms full return to duty wouldn't be possible," Morgan summarized. "We've scheduled the procedure for next week." "That aligns with what we were expecting," Rivera acknowledged. "But that's not actually why I'm calling. There's been a development in Mercer's case that you should be aware of." Morgan's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "What kind of development?" "We've located him," Rivera stated flatly. "He was attempting to flee across the state line, but a highway patrol officer recognized his vehicle from our alert and initiated a stop. Mercer is now in custody, facing multiple charges related to animal cruelty, falsification of police records, and potential involvement in organized dogfighting. The news should have brought satisfaction, justice finally catching up to the man who had betrayed and abused Atlas so profoundly. Instead, Morgan felt a strange unease, as if Mercer's capture had opened a door to complications she hadn't fully anticipated. "That's good news," she replied, trying to sound appropriately positive. "Will Atlas need to be involved in the case?" Rivera's slight hesitation confirmed Morgan's concerns. "The prosecutor wants to document Atlas's injuries as evidence. Dr. Winters' records provide substantial documentation, but they're requesting current photographs and possibly video of his condition, particularly the leg injury and other visible evidence of mistreatment." "I understand," Morgan said, though her instinct was to protect Atlas from any further involvement with the man who had harmed him. "When would this need to happen?" "Ideally within the next few days, before the surgery alters the condition of his leg," Rivera explained. "I could come to your cabin tomorrow if that works for you. It would just be me, documenting with a department camera. No other personnel, nothing invasive." Morgan agreed to the arrangement, disconnecting the call with mixed emotions. While she supported holding Mercer accountable, the idea of using Atlas's suffering as evidence felt somehow exploitative, even if logically she understood its necessity for the case. When they finally arrived back at the cabin, Atlas seemed to relax visibly, his body language shifting from the alert vigilance he maintained in unfamiliar surroundings to the more comfortable demeanor he displayed in what had become his territory. He made his way to his bed with the halting gait that Morgan had grown accustomed to, but now viewed with new understanding after seeing the detailed images of his damaged leg. "One more hurdle tomorrow," Morgan told him as she prepared his evening. "Medications, and then we focus on getting you ready for surgery next week." Atlas accepted his pills with the cooperative attitude he always showed for medical procedures, seeming to understand on some level that these interventions were for his benefit. His capacity for trust, despite what humans had done to him, continued to humble Morgan, making her all the more determined to ensure his future held only kindness and respect. The next morning, Detective Rivera arrived as scheduled, carrying a professional camera case and accompanied by an unexpected second visitor, a woman in her early 50s with silver-streaked dark hair and the composed demeanor of someone accustomed to authority. "Ranger Hayes, this is Captain Laurel Sanderson from the State Police K9 Training Division," Rivera introduced as they approached the cabin. When she heard about today's documentation, she asked to accompany me. Captain Sanderson was involved in Atlas's initial training 4 years ago. Morgan's surprise must have shown on her face as Captain Sanderson quickly added, "I hope my presence isn't an imposition. When I learned Atlas had been found alive, I felt professionally and personally compelled to see him. The K9 Division takes the welfare of our dogs extremely seriously, and what happened represents a catastrophic failure of our oversight systems." Inside the cabin, Atlas was immediately alert to the visitors, his posture shifting as he caught their scents. When Captain Sanderson came into his line of sight, his reaction was extraordinary. His ears pricked forward, his body tensed, and a soft whine escaped him that sounded almost like recognition. "Hello, Atlas," Sanderson said quietly, remaining at a respectful distance. "It's been a long time." The German shepherd's tail began to move in a tentative wag, his eyes fixed on Sanderson with an intensity that suggested he did indeed remember her from his training days. "May I approach him?" Sanderson asked Morgan, properly acknowledging her position as Atlas's current caretaker. Morgan nodded, watching carefully as the captain moved slowly toward Atlas's bed and crouched at a non-threatening distance. Atlas continued to watch her with that same intense focus, his tail movement becoming more pronounced. "He remembers you," Morgan observed. "I worked directly with his training group for 8 months, Sanderson explained, her voice carrying a controlled emotion. "Atlas was exceptional even within a cohort selected for excellence. We had high hopes for his service career." She extended her hand, palm down, allowing Atlas to scent her more thoroughly. After a moment's consideration, he stretched his neck to make contact, giving her fingers a brief lick that seemed to carry significance beyond a simple greeting. "I'm so sorry the system failed you," Sanderson told him quietly, "but I'm very glad to see you found someone who didn't." The documentation process proceeded with careful attention to Atlas's comfort. Detective Rivera photographed his injuries systematically, focusing particularly on his malformed leg, the scarring on his flanks, and the still-healing wounds on his shoulder and neck. Captain Sanderson assisted by helping position Atlas when necessary, using commands from his training days that he still responded to with ingrained precision. "He's retained his basic training remarkably well," Sanderson commented as Atlas held a requested position despite the discomfort it clearly caused his injured leg. That speaks to both the quality of his initial training and his exceptional memory and intelligence. When the documentation was complete, Rivera packed away the camera while Sanderson continued her assessment of Atlas's overall condition. Her expertise with police working dogs was evident in the specificity of her observations, noting subtle indicators of his psychological state, evaluating his responses to various stimuli, and assessing his attention patterns. Given what he's been through, his mental resilience is extraordinary, she finally concluded. Many dogs would be showing far more significant psychological trauma responses after such experiences. Morgan had been wondering about the captain's role beyond her historical connection to Atlas. Now seemed the moment to ask directly. "Captain Sanderson, may I ask what your involvement in Atlas's case will be going forward?" Sanderson straightened, her expression becoming more formal. "My division has been tasked with making recommendations regarding Atlas's official status. Based on the orthopedic assessment and today's observations, I'll be preparing a report addressing whether he should be considered for reassignment, specialized limited duty, or official retirement." The statement confirmed what Morgan had suspected. This visit was part of the evaluation process that would determine Atlas's future. She appreciated the captain's transparency, but felt a renewed anxiety about the decision that remained outside her control. "And what's your initial assessment?" Morgan asked, unable to keep herself from seeking some insight into Sanderson's thinking. The captain's gaze moved thoughtfully between Atlas and Morgan. "Officially, I need to review all medical reports and consult with our department veterinarian before making formal recommendations." She paused before continuing in a slightly different tone. "Unofficially, based on my experience with hundreds of police canines throughout their careers, I believe Atlas's service career, in its traditional form, is concluded. His physical limitations would prevent him from performing the core duties of a patrol canine safely and effectively." This assessment aligned with Dr. Reeves's conclusions, but hearing it from a police canine authority carried additional weight. Morgan felt a complex emotion, confirmation that Atlas wouldn't be returned to full police service, but uncertainty about what alternative the department might propose. "There are, however, other ways he might continue to serve if that's determined to be in his best interest," Sanderson added. "Some retired K9s transition to public education roles, demonstrations, or even therapy work. Others benefit most from full retirement in an appropriate home environment." Before Morgan could explore these possibilities further, Detective Rivera received a call that required her immediate attention. As she stepped outside to take it, Captain Sanderson seized the opportunity for a more private conversation. "Ranger, Hayes, I'd like to speak candidly," she said, her voice lower and more personal than her previous professional tone. "I've been in canine training and management for over 20 years. In that time, I've seen hundreds of dogs transition from service to retirement. The most critical factor in successful transitions isn't the specific role they move to, but the relationship they have with their handler or adopter." She glanced at Atlas, who was watching their conversation with attentive interest. "The bond you've formed with him in such a short time is remarkable. He shows signs of trust and security in your presence that many properly retired canines don't achieve even after months with new adopters." Morgan was surprised by this assessment. "I've just been providing the care he needed." "It's considerably more than that," Sanderson countered. "Atlas is displaying attachment behaviors typically reserved for long-term handling relationships. He tracks your movements, positions himself to maintain visual contact with you, and shows visible relaxation in your presence. These are hallmarks of a secure bond, something particularly significant given his history of handler betrayal." The captain's observations aligned with what Morgan had felt intuitively, but had been hesitant to claim without external validation. The connection with Atlas had indeed developed with surprising rapidity and depth, but she had attributed this more to his need for security after trauma than to anything unique about their relationship. "I'm telling you this," Sanderson continued, "because I want you to understand the weight your input should carry in decisions about his future. While the department must follow protocols regarding disabled service animals, the welfare of the dog remains our primary consideration. Your perspective on what environment would best support Atlas's continued recovery and quality of life will be taken very seriously." This explicit acknowledgement of Morgan's role in determining Atlas's future was both reassuring and weighty with responsibility. Before she could formulate a response, Detective Rivera returned, her expression troubled. "There's been a complication," she announced without preamble. "Mercer's attorney is challenging the charges, claiming Atlas was already injured when Mercer took possession of him, and that he was attempting to find appropriate care when circumstances intervened." "That's absurd," Morgan responded, indignation flaring. "You've seen his condition, the cage he was abandoned in during a flood. What possible defense could justify that?" "It's a legal maneuver, not a plausible narrative," Rivera explained, her frustration evident beneath her professional demeanor. "But it creates procedural hurdles we need to address. The prosecutor is requesting a full veterinary forensic assessment to establish timeline and causation for Atlas's injuries." The implications were immediately apparent to Morgan. What does that mean for his scheduled surgery? "They're asking for a delay until the forensic veterinarian can complete their documentation," Rivera confirmed. "The prosecutor is concerned that post-surgical changes could complicate the evidence." Captain Sanderson's expression darkened. "That's putting the legal case ahead of the animal's welfare. Atlas needs that surgery for quality of life, not just cosmetic repair." "I conveyed those concerns," Rivera assured them. "The prosecutor is looking into options, including having the forensic assessment expedited or potentially documented during the surgery itself. But there may be an unavoidable delay of at least a few days." The news landed heavily in the cabin's atmosphere. Atlas, sensing the tension, shifted restlessly in his bed, his eyes moving between the three humans as if trying to understand the sudden change in emotional climate. "How long a delay are we talking about?" Morgan asked already, considering how this might affect Atlas's recovery trajectory and the pain management protocols they'd established. "Best case 3 to 4 days, while they bring in a specialized forensic veterinarian," Rivera replied. "Worst case up to 2 weeks if there are scheduling conflicts or if the defense attorney manages to secure a court order mandating specific procedures." 2 weeks of additional pain and limited mobility for Atlas, not for his benefit, but to strengthen a case against the man who had harmed him. The unfairness of it struck Morgan as a continuation of the system failing him, albeit with different intentions. Captain Sanderson seemed to share this perspective. "I'll make some calls," she stated, her tone suggesting she had influence she intended to leverage. "The department has resources that might help expedite this process. Atlas's welfare should be the priority here, not procedural convenience." As the visitors prepared to leave, Morgan found herself standing beside Atlas's bed, one hand resting gently on his head in a gesture that had become natural between them. The uncertainty surrounding his surgery, and by extension his future path, felt like yet another burden being placed on shoulders that had already carried too much. Yet looking down at Atlas, alert, resilient, maintaining his dignity despite pain and uncertainty, Morgan found herself drawing strength from his example. If he could face each day with such steadfast courage, how could she offer anything less in return? "We'll figure this out," she promised him quietly. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Atlas leaned into her touch, his amber eyes, meeting hers with that profound understanding that transcended species barriers. In that silent exchange lay a commitment deeper than words could express, a promise not just to navigate the immediate medical challenges, but to ensure that whatever future emerged from these decisions would honor the extraordinary spirit that had survived betrayal, abuse, and abandonment to forge this unexpected bond. As Detective Rivera and Captain Sanderson departed, their vehicle disappearing down the forest road, Morgan remained beside Atlas, the afternoon sun casting lengthening shadows across the cabin floor. The path ahead remained uncertain, complicated, now by legal proceedings and departmental deliberations beyond their control. Yet in the quiet of that moment, with Atlas's solid presence beside her, Morgan found an unexpected clarity, not about what decisions would be made or what the future might hold, but about her own resolve to remain Atlas's advocate and ally through whatever challenges lay ahead. That commitment, at least, was something entirely within her power to fulfill. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.